Hey, what's going on? Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for a discography review for you guys. So for this review, I'll be reviewing the legendary discography of Melodeath Legends In Flames. Now, we all know that In Flames recently put out a new album, so I figured it would be interesting to go back and take a look at all their albums and see how far they've come over the years. And obviously, we all know the situation with In Flames. They started out as a melodeath band. They're of course from Gothenburg, Sweden, and they kind of had that sound to them, that melodeath sound, and then over time you can tell that the band was, I guess, starting to want to appeal more to the masses, you could say, take their sound in a more radio-friendly commercial direction, which I do like some of the stuff from that era of the band, but a lot of it I do think is either just bad to forgettable to mediocre. But yeah, I do find a lot of that stuff to be not all that special in my opinion. But of course we're going to talk about all their albums. Of course we're not going to talk about compilations or live albums or anything, just the main albums, of course. I do dig most of their stuff. I've been an In Flames fan since 2016, I think. So it was around the time when Battles was coming out. I want to say I got into them in the spring or summertime of that year, and then Battles came out that fall of that year. So I do remember when Battles was coming out, and yeah, that album, I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag for me, but we'll get there when we get there, of course. So it, of course, all started with Lunar Strain, which this album here has the vocalist who is now for Dark Tranquillity. And I've even seen some people say that this album kind of goes into some black metal territory, and maybe that's because of the vocals, which I can kind of see. I mean, it's just really raw, gritty sounding metal. I mean, it's just really great. I mean, you of course have Behind Space, which is probably one of my favorite In Flames songs, to be honest. I really love this song a lot, just where it goes musically and everything about it, the heaviness as well. I also really like the title track and Star Forsaken, some other favorites of mine that are just raw sounding melodeath tracks. And you also have the song In Flames, which I think is not bad, and you also have Upon an Oaken Throne, also pretty good. But yeah, the first half of this album I would definitely say is better than the second half, but the second half isn't bad, once again. I mean, it's just raw sounding metal, and it's just really heavy, really good stuff. And of course, again, the album with the vocalist who is now the vocalist for Dark Tranquillity, and then Anders came over to In Flames from Dark Tranquillity, so they basically just swapped vocalists, so there you go. But yeah, Lunar Strain, definitely a great album, definitely a classic. But after that, we got an EP entitled Subterranean. And I don't reach for this one a lot or anything, but I do like it though. I think there's some very strong stuff on this album, like Stand Ablaze, of course, which is probably the best song on here. I also really like the title track, Subterranean, as well. I really like the riffage in that song. You also have some covers on here as well from Metallica and Iron Maiden. Now, these covers, I mean, I could pretty much speak for any fan and say that I could really live without these covers. I mean, I think a lot of us can agree that the originals are way better. I mean, these covers just don't really do a whole lot for me. They're not awful or anything. They just don't do much for me, but still not bad. I wouldn't call them bad, but yeah. Pretty solid EP for what it is. But then we got, in my opinion, their best album, and also one of my favorite albums of all time, and that being The Jester Race. This is the first album with Anders Frieden in the band, and yeah, they really amped everything up on this album. Now, I know that some people may not like the production on this album, but putting the production aside, I really dig it. I mean, I dig the rawness of it. I dig the acoustic passages that lead into the heaviness. I mean, it really does show a lot of creativity, and the talent in this band really did shine on this album, and I do think that this is the peak of their career. I mean, I do think that this is the best album that they've ever put out, to be quite honest, actually. But yeah, this does have some of my favorite In Flames songs, of course, like Moon Shield, the opening track. Probably the best In Flames opening track ever, to be quite honest. I really dig the acoustic intro of this song that builds up and leads to the heaviness of this song, just really great. And you also have The Jester's Dance, which is an instrumental, and honestly, probably their best instrumental track. You also have Artifacts of the Black Rain, probably another personal favorite In Flames track for me. I mean, I dig the riff work and the heaviness of it, and just the way it flows and everything. It's just fantastic. I mean, really great. You also have songs like Lord Hypnos and December Flower, which, when it comes to the songs on this album that I find underrated, these songs definitely come to mind for me. I dig these songs. You also have the title track, of course, The Jester Race, which is probably another favorite of mine on the album. Really dig it. But yeah, honestly, a great album and an essential melodeath album. I mean, I would say that if you call yourself a melodeath fan, this album is basically a requirement to listen to, and I would even go as far to say that it's a requirement to like as well, or be a fan of. Now, I know that music is subjective, but let's be real here. I mean, I think a lot of In Flames fans can agree that this is easily one of their best. Obviously, there's not many fans that don't like this album anyway, so there you go. But yeah, The Jester Race, definitely a great album, and again, probably one of my favorite albums of all time. I mean, this album basically has no skips. It's just a really fantastic album, and a great start with Anders in the band. But then we got Oracle, which I do think that this album is one of their best. In my opinion, not as good as The Jester Race, but still very strong. I mean, it's almost up on that same level as The Jester Race, I would say. Now, there was a time where I wasn't really that into this album, but as I've given this album more time, more chances, I do think it's one of their best. I do think it's a really great album. You can maybe make the argument that the production, at least, is better than it was on The Jester Race, but yeah, you have some great tracks on here, like Joten, Gyroscope, Dialogue with the Stars, and The Hive. Now, this is another one of those albums where the first half is easily better than the second half, but overall, I think it's a great album and definitely another melodeath classic. But next we have Colony. Probably another one of their best, to be honest. Honestly, In Flames has had a really strong run in the 90s. I mean, they were just putting out solid album after solid album, especially up to this point, and even the one that came after. But yeah, with this album here, you can kind of tell In Flames are, I mean, they're not fully there yet, but you can kind of tell that they're kind of taking an interest in making more accessible sounding metal that's a little easier to get into for individuals, maybe for people, you know, that maybe like new metal or alternative metal or something. You can kind of tell that they're trying to fit in with them, you could say, trying to gain more fans by going a little more melodic, with you know, more accessibility, especially with songs like the title track and Ordinary Story. Ordinary Story is definitely a more accessible track, a song that's pretty easy to get into, but I do like this song, actually. I mean, it's got some great riff work and great vocal work, and yeah, it's a pretty captivating song, I'd say. And you, of course, have Embody the Invisible, which I also think is really good, Scorn, and Zombie Inc. I also like. But yeah, pretty good stuff, pretty good songs on this album. So Colony, pretty good. So next we have Clayman, which I do think that this album is a step up from Colony. And that says a lot, because I do think that they took that accessibility, you know, that sort of, what do you want to call it? That sort of like accessible sound even furthermore with this album here. Like, this album here is even more easier to get into than Colony was. And you can tell that In Flames from this point on were going in that direction. It seemed like every album that came out after each release up to this point, they were getting more and more radio friendly. But I still dig this album. I would even say it's one of their best, to be honest. And this does have some of my favorite In Flames songs, such as the first 3 tracks on this album: Bullet Ride, Pinball Map, and Only for the Weak. These are a few of my favorite songs from the band. I mean, Bullet Ride, another one of their best opening tracks. Pinball Map, very catchy and memorable. Same could be said for Only for the Weak, which is maybe the biggest song on the album. But yeah, it's more accessible, more radio friendly. You know, again, trying to maybe appeal more to the alternative metal fans, but yeah, I still think it's a great track. And you also have Square Nothing, and you have Another Day in Quicksand, which are, you know, lesser known songs that are not so bad. But yeah, Clayman, really great. I'd say it's one of their best. But then they really took their sound in a way more mainstream direction with this album here, Reroute to Remain. Now, even with that said, I do like this album. I mean, is it a step down from everything that they've done before? Absolutely. But even in saying that, this album is still not bad. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's one of their best, but I wouldn't say it's one of their worst albums either. I mean, I do like the title track. I do like Trigger, of course, which is one of the biggest songs on here. Cloud Connected is also a big song on this album. Dawn of a New Day is a song that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I kind of dig this one. It's not one of their best songs or anything, at least I wouldn't say it is, but it's not bad. You also have Free Fall, which is actually another favorite of mine on the album, but yeah, you do have some more experimental stuff going on here, such as the song Metaphor. This song, I don't listen to it a lot or anything. I do appreciate that it's different. I mean, it's more on the melodic side of things, but I don't know. I don't really return to this one that much, but it's not bad though. It's definitely not bad, but yeah, all around, really good album. Now, could this album benefit from some trimming? Absolutely. I mean, there is definitely, you know, at least 2 or 3 tracks on this album you could easily take out of this album and maybe it would have been better, but all around, really good album from the band. So, Reroute to Remain. But of course, they took their sound even furthermore in the mainstream direction with Soundtrack to Your Escape. Now, I'm not sure which album I like more, this one or Reroute to Remain more. I mean, the production on this album is something that I do have to, I guess, make a little gripe about. It sounds very robotic. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that thinks that. I don't know. I just feel like that there's something wrong with the production on this album. But all around, it's not bad. I mean, there is some good stuff on here, like The Quiet Place, Friend, Dead Alone, Touch of Red, My Sweet Shadow, and Evil in a Closet. These are all really good. And you also have Bottled as well, which I think is kind of underrated, but yeah. They're trying some different stuff here. You can definitely tell on this album that it's much different from the stuff that they put out before, but even so, I still think the album is good. I mean, I wouldn't call it great or amazing or anything, but it is good. It's definitely a good album. So next we have Come Clarity, which this album here I definitely think is a step up from Soundtrack to Your Escape and even Reroute to Remain. I think at the time this was the best thing that they've done since Clayman, and I think many people would agree with me on that. I mean, they definitely took their sound in a better direction on this album. I mean, it's got pretty good production. I wouldn't really consider any of the songs on this album bad either. I mean, you have Take This Life, which is probably the most well-known song on here, along with the title track, Come Clarity. Not a song that I return to much, but I think it's not bad. It's pretty good for what it is. And yeah, you have Reflect the Storm, Dead End, Scream, Pacing Death's Trail, Crawl Through Knives, a very catchy song that's also kind of more accessible. I really like the way that they balance the heaviness and the melody in that song. But yeah, a lot of great tracks on here. And I think when it comes to their 2000s work, I'd say that this is one of their best. So there you go, Come Clarity. Really good one. But then we got A Sense of Purpose, which I do think is a step down from Come Clarity. But with saying that, I still like this album. I'm actually a defender of this album. I think that this album is pretty good. Now, could that be because this album has my first In Flames song, the first song that I ever heard, and the song that pretty much got me into the band? Maybe. That song being Alias or Elias, however you say it. Easily one of the best tracks on the album that features some great melodies and some great guitar work. But of course you have other great tracks on here like The Mirror's Truth, Disconnected, Sleepless Again, Delight in Angers, Drenched in Fear. A lot of great tracks. Now, with this album here, you can definitely tell that they're once again changing some things up. Definitely a lot more accessible, kind of going into some, you could say, alternative metal territory. But yeah, all around still pretty good for what it is. I actually dig a lot of the stuff on this album, even if it is radio friendly or accessible. But yeah, A Sense of Purpose, I dig it. Not one of their best, but still pretty good, I'd say. But then they really step things up, in my opinion, with Sounds of a Playground Fading. Now, this album here is one of those albums where you either love it or you hate it. Now, I wouldn't say that I love it necessarily, but I do like it a lot, though. I do think that when it comes to the 2010s era of the band, this is easily the best. I mean, what I like about this album, though, besides the fact that it was actually the first In Flames CD I ever picked up, believe that or not, it is, but what I do like about this album, though, is the atmosphere that it delivers. It's a pretty dark-sounding album. It's pretty serious, and I think it does a good job of maintaining some elements of their classic sound, but also some elements of the more accessible, more mainstream side of the band. I mean, I dig this album. I really do. And I think this album actually gets too much crap, to be honest. I mean, is there maybe a couple songs that I could live without on here? Yes. I mean, if I had to choose a least favorite song on here, it would definitely be the closing track, Liberation, which I don't think is even that bad. But this song here was definitely an indication for what was to come in the next album, which I do think is their worst. But there's a lot of great tracks on here. I mean, the title track, Deliver Us. You also have All For Me and The Puzzle. The Puzzle is probably one of the heaviest tracks on this album. You also have Fear Is the Weakness, Where the Dead Ships Dwell. And The Attic. Now, The Attic, it's not one of my favorites on here by any means, but I kind of do like it, though. It's just, I don't want to call it an interlude. Like, it could easily pass as its own individual In Flames song. You know, it's very dark and kind of moody, you know, especially if you really listen to it, but yeah, not bad. You also have Darker Times, A New Dawn, which I would even go as far to say is one of their most underrated songs. Probably one of my favorites on this album, too. I mean, I really dig the orchestral elements of this song, especially. I thought that was a nice feature to the song. And even the chorus has a great chorus, and probably one of my favorite choruses on the album. But yeah, I can really go on about this album, to be honest. I mean, I do think that this album is actually pretty strong and not as bad as a lot of fans make it out to be. But Sounds of a Playground Fading, I do think it's really good, actually. But then, unfortunately, they kind of went downhill with the next release, Siren Charms. easily their worst album in my opinion. Now, there was a moment in time, mainly when I first became an In Flames fan, I actually thought that this album was pretty good, but over time, my opinion has changed, and I do think that this album is honestly not that good, to be honest. I mean, if you wanted to make the argument that the album is at least average, fair enough, but I mean, this album has maybe a couple songs that I think are decent, such as Paralyzed and Dead Eyes. These songs are not so bad, and I think With Eyes Wide Open is decent. It's a decent song, but yeah, this album, it does have some of their worst songs though, like Through Oblivion, which I think is one of the singles on here. Never could get into that one. I thought that that song was really cringy and lame. I could really say the same thing for the title track. The title track might honestly be one of their worst songs as well, but yeah, I wasn't really too thrilled with Rusted Nail either, but yeah. All around, this album, it's not that good. It's not that good of an album, and I think it's easily their worst. But then, In Flames came back with another album that I do think is a step up from Siren Charms, and I, of course, was a fan when this album was coming out, and I am, of course, talking about Battles. This album, I do have sort of mixed feelings about. I mean, there's tracks that I do like from this album, but all around, I still don't think the album is all that great. I mean, I do give the band props for at least putting out a better album than Siren Charms, but yeah, you can definitely tell that the themes are different this time around in comparison to Siren Charms. You know, I don't know if it's the production or the sound of the album. I'm not really sure, but there is some stuff that I do like from here, like Drained. And the end, I don't think is as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Like Sand, I think is pretty good. I mean, not great or amazing or anything, but it's, I don't think it's bad. Now, The Truth, I think that this song is just trash. I'm not really a fan of it. In My Room is okay. It's an okay song. Same could be said for Before I Fall. I think that this is an okay song as well. Through My Eyes, I think is another one of their worst songs. It's either through My Eyes or Here Until Forever. Maybe I'm thinking of maybe I got the two songs confused. I think it's Here Until Forever that I'm thinking of. But yeah, Through My Eyes is not that great either, to be honest, but Here Until Forever I do think is one of their worst songs. Wallflower is probably the best song on the album, to be honest, in my opinion. Now, the lyrics, not the most original out there, but the song itself, for what it is, it's not all bad. I mean, I dig the instrumental intro and everything like that, and Anders' vocals, not all bad. Now, Save Me, I think, is another one of the worst In Flames songs as well. I cannot stand Anders screaming in this song. I think it's just awful, to be honest. But one of their worst albums, easily, that do have a few of their worst songs. But again, there's a few songs on this album that I think are actually not bad. And I think they're okay, actually. But yeah, so Battles, not one of their best. But then we got I, The Mask. Now, I do remember when this album was coming out, I had some high expectations for it, especially with the singles at the time. I thought that maybe In Flames were heading in a better direction this time around, because obviously, the couple albums before, not all that strong. But this album here, I actually think it's decent. I mean, I kind of put it on the same level as Battles, to be honest. Like, between this album and Battles, I'm still not sure which one I like more or which one I like less. But yeah, this album here, I mean, there is a chance that I do like this album more than Battles. I do think that this album does have some better songwriting to it. I mean, I do like songs like Voices, the opening track, probably one of the heaviest tracks on the album. I the Mask, the title track, I think is pretty good. You also have Burn, which I think is alright. All the Pain, also not too bad. And you have Stay With Me, which is, honestly, I think this song is pretty good. It's one of the more emotional tracks from In Flames, but I dig it. But, of course, you do have one of the worst In Flames songs ever, maybe even a contender for being their worst song, and that being This Is Our House. Just no, not a good song. I'm sure I can speak for many fans when I say that. Not a good song, but the album, it's not that bad. It's really not that bad. I mean, does it have some skippable tracks? Heck yeah, it does, but the album, it's not all bad. It does have its redeeming factors to it, so I the Mask, I think it's a decent album. It's not so bad. But then, of course, we get to their new album, Foregone. Now, so far, this album has been doing fairly well with the fans. Definitely their best album that they've put out in years. I've heard some say that it's their best since Sounds of a Playground Fading, which I might say the same thing, but I think that this album might actually surpass that album, to be honest. Like, this might be the best thing that In Flames has done, maybe since Come Clarity. At least since around then, you know. But I do think the album is actually that strong, to be honest. I mean, I wouldn't say that In Flames completely went back to their melodeath roots, although this is definitely the most melodeath that they've been in a while. It's more melodeath than anything that they've done in the 2010s, even in the late 2000s maybe. But yeah, they definitely took their sound in a different direction, definitely an improvement. And I think that this album would please a lot of In Flames fans. Like, no matter which era of the band that you prefer, whether you prefer their melodeath stuff or whether you're someone that prefers their more mainstream accessible stuff, there's going to be something for you on this album. And I think that this album does a good job in doing that. Because you do get some of Anders' clean singing, but you also get the heaviness like you get in the early melodeath albums. But yeah, I think it's a great album. Definitely an improvement from the last few albums. Some of my favorites on here would have to be State of Slow Decay, Foregone Part 1 and 2, which are great songs. Foregone Part 2 definitely relies more on the melody, and I really enjoy that one. But of course, you have The Great Deceiver, which is another favorite of mine. In the Dark, another one of my favorite In Flames songs that structurally is very interesting. I like the melody and the heaviness of the song. I think this song does a very good job of balancing these two things. And yeah, you have End the Transmission, which I think is it's a decent song. I mean, is it one of my favorites on here? Not necessarily, but I think it's not bad. So there you go. Foregone, I think it's a really good album, and in my opinion, the best thing that they've done in some time. So there you go. That is my discography review for In Flames. Overall, a solid discography. I mean, obviously they've had some bumps in the road, and I think for many people who were starting to give up hope on In Flames have decided to give Foregone a chance, and, you know, it redeemed the fandom in them, you could say. And a lot of people are thankful that In Flames, they seem like they're getting back on the right track. So that is definitely a positive for sure. So great band, and honestly my favorite melodeath band. So let me know what you think. Are you a fan of In Flames? What are your favorite albums? What's your least favorite albums? Feel free to let me know. So on that note, thanks for watching and have a good one.